A little girl was crying outside Buckingham Palace. Silent tears, the kind that means real trouble. Then she handed the royal guard a crumpled note, and what was written inside made him break 3 centuries of protocol. He wasn't supposed to move, he wasn't supposed to speak, but what that note said changed everything. So what exactly was written on that piece of paper? Before we reveal it, smash that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get into it. The morning smelled like spring rain and fresh flowers from Green Park. One of those rare London days when the clouds actually break apart and let some decent light through. Buckingham Palace looked properly golden instead of its usual grey, and tourists were out in force. Cameras clicking, kids pointing, everyone trying to get that perfect shot before the weather changed its mind again. You could hear at least 6 different languages being spoken, just standing in one spot. A Japanese tour group clustered near the main gates, their guide holding up a bright yellow umbrella. German teenagers took selfies by the rope barriers. An American family argued about whether they had time to see the changing of the guard before their Thames cruise. The usual circus, really. Colour Sergeant Nathan Hale stood like a statue at the south gate, watching it all with the kind of attention most people reserve for action films. 38 years old, 17 years with the Coldstream Guards. He'd done 3 tours in Estonia back when things were properly rough there. Roadside bombs, sniper fire, the kind of deployment where you learned to notice everything or you didn't come home. His chest carried ribbons most tourists wouldn't recognise. General Service Medal with Estonia clasp, Long Service and Good Conduct Medal, and a Meritorious Service Medal he'd earned for saving a convoy by spotting an IED trigger hidden in what looked like roadside rubbish. That last one had taught him something crucial. Danger doesn't always announce itself with sirens and flashing lights. Sometimes it just sits there, waiting for someone to notice what doesn't belong. His boots reflected the palace windows like black mirrors. Every brass button caught the morning light just right. To anyone watching, he was just another red-coated figure standing motionless by the gates. Part of the scenery, a living statue in a bearskin hat. But that was the thing about Nathan Hale. He was never really motionless. Not where it counted. Behind that ceremonial stillness was a mind that never stopped working. His eyes moved constantly, scanning faces, tracking movement, cataloguing everything. Old habits from convoy duty, where noticing a plastic bottle turned the wrong way on a roadside had once saved 8 lives. Same instincts, different battlefield, because protecting people was protecting people. Whether you were dodging IEDs in Tallinn or watching tourists in central London. The forecourt buzzed with its usual Tuesday morning chaos. A violinist played something classical near the viewing area. Some kid dropped ice cream and started wailing until his mum bought him another one. Tour groups clustered around their guides like sheep, cameras held high, everyone pushing closer to the rope barriers for that perfect Instagram shot. Just another Tuesday morning at the palace, really. The kind of day where nothing was supposed to happen except ceremony and tradition, and tourists taking photos they'd look at once and forget. Then Hale spotted her. She was sitting by herself near one of the stone pillars, just outside the main crowd, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Maybe 7 years old, dark hair in a messy ponytail that looked like someone had done it in a hurry. Her coat was too big for her. Navy blue, hanging off her thin shoulders like it belonged to an older sister, or had been grabbed from a charity shop without checking the size. Her shoes were wrong too. Scuffed trainers that didn't match, the left one clearly larger than the right, like someone had grabbed whatever was available without caring about fit or comfort. The kind of detail that meant something to someone trained to notice details. But what really got Hale's attention was that she wasn't doing what kids do. Most children her age would be bouncing on their toes trying to see over adults, tugging on sleeves, asking endless questions, getting bored and fidgety after 5 minutes of standing still. They'd be pointing at the guards, whispering to their parents, maybe trying to wave and get a reaction. This girl was just sitting there, arms wrapped around her knees, crying. Not the dramatic sobbing you'd expect from a tired child having a meltdown in public. This was quiet. The kind of tears that fall when you've given up expecting anyone to notice. When you've learned that making noise only makes things worse. Most people walked right past her. A few glanced over, clocked that she was upset, then looked away with that particular British awkwardness that kicks in when someone else's child is having problems. Easy assumption to make. Probably just tired from walking, waiting for her parents to finish taking photos. But Nathan Hale had learned not to trust easy assumptions. Not when it came to children sitting alone in public places, looking like they'd rather disappear entirely. He kept watching. 10 minutes passed. The girl didn't move except to wipe her nose with the back of her hand, careful, quiet movements that suggested she was trying not to draw attention. Around her, the crowd flowed and shifted. Tour groups moved on, new ones arrived. Parents chased children who'd wandered too close to the barriers. But nobody approached the girl. Nobody asked if she was all right. After 12 minutes, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. Crumpled, like it had been folded and unfolded multiple times. The edges were soft with handling, and even from a distance, Hale could see it was covered in writing. She stared at it for a long moment, holding it in both hands like it weighed more than it should. Her lips moved slightly as she read whatever was written there. Then she looked around, not the way a lost child searches for familiar faces, but the way someone checks to see if they're being watched. Quick, nervous glances that suggested she was working up courage for something. Something in Hale's gut, that instinct that had kept him alive in places where being wrong meant being dead, told him this wasn't about a lost toy or wanting to go home. This felt different, purposeful, desperate. The girl folded the paper again and stood up slowly. Hale noticed she favoured her left leg slightly, like it hurt to put weight on it. When she turned toward the rope barrier, he could see her face properly for the first time, red-rimmed eyes from crying. A small bruise near her hairline, faded yellow-green like it was a week or two old. Knuckles scraped raw like she'd tried to catch herself falling, or fighting back. But it was her expression that made Hale's chest tighten. This wasn't the face of a child who'd wandered away from her parents. This was the face of someone who'd run out of options and was down to her last desperate plan. She walked toward Hale's position with careful, measured steps. Not the bouncing skip of an excited child approaching the famous guards, but the cautious movement of someone who'd learned that moving too fast brought trouble. Around her, the crowd continued its cheerful chaos. Nobody was watching the little girl make her way toward the rope barrier with the gravity of someone approaching an execution. When she reached the rope, she stopped just a few feet away from where Hale stood. Her hand clutched that piece of paper so tight her knuckles had gone white. She looked up at him. Not at his face, which she couldn't really see under the bearskin hat, but at his chest, his uniform, the red wool and gleaming buttons that represented something she hoped might help her. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, working up the courage for whatever she'd planned to do. Her breathing was quick and shallow, the way people breathe when they're scared, but trying not to show it. Then, slowly, she held out the paper. Her arm trembled as she stretched it toward him. Behind her eyes, Hale could see something he recognized from war zones. That particular kind of fear that comes from knowing you're running out of options. When you've tried everything else, and this is your last shot at getting someone to listen. Protocol was crystal clear. Guards don't interact with tourists beyond basic crowd control. Don't accept objects from the public. Don't engage in conversation unless specifically ordered to do so. 3 centuries of tradition said Nathan Hale should remain exactly where he was, eyes forward, acknowledging nothing. But the girl's hand stayed extended, waiting. Her whole body was tense with hope and terror, like someone standing on a cliff edge working up the courage to jump. When she realized he couldn't take it, or wouldn't, her face crumpled slightly. Not with anger or frustration, but with the quiet devastation of someone whose last plan had failed. For a moment, Hale thought she might just give up, turn around and walk away to whatever fate was waiting for her. Instead, she made a quick decision. She dropped the note on the stone just inside the rope barrier and stepped back. Not far, just enough to show she wasn't trying to cause trouble or break any rules. Her eyes met his for just a second, a look that said everything she couldn't speak out loud. Please, just please. Then she turned and walked quickly back to her spot by the pillar, leaving the paper lying there in the morning breeze, like a message in a bottle washed up on an empty shore. Hale waited until a tourist group shifted past, their chatter and camera clicks providing cover. Then he let his boot edge forward just enough to pin down the corner of the note before the wind could take it. Casual movement, nothing that would draw attention from the crowd or the security cameras, constantly monitoring the area. When the tourists cleared for a moment, he angled his head just slightly and read. The handwriting was shaky, childlike. Some letters were backwards, others too big or too small. There was a smudge near the top where tears had fallen, and the paper was soft from being handled so much. But the words were clear enough. He says he'll take me again tonight. Please don't let him. He's standing behind me. I'm scared. Nathan Hale had read field reports from active combat zones, intelligence briefings about terrorist threats, casualty reports from roadside bombings. None of them had hit him like those 20 words written in a child's unsteady hand. He says he'll take me again. Again. Not the first time. This had happened before, possibly multiple times, and tonight it was going to happen again unless someone intervened. Please don't let him. She was asking for help, not from a police officer or a social worker or anyone with official authority to protect children. From a stranger in a red coat who wasn't supposed to talk or move or do anything except stand there looking ceremonial. He's standing behind me, present tense, right now. The threat wasn't hypothetical or something that might happen later. It was here in the crowd, watching her every move. I'm scared. 2 words that carried the weight of everything she couldn't say. Hale's jaw clenched under the rigid control of his ceremonial stance. Every instinct he'd developed over 17 years of military service was screaming at him to act, but first he needed to find him. His gaze swept the forecourt with practiced efficiency, looking for someone who didn't quite fit the usual tourist patterns. Someone watching the girl instead of the guards. Someone standing alone in a crowd full of families and tour groups. There, 40 feet away, near the eastern edge of the rope line. Middle-aged man, thin build, wearing a dark wool cap pulled low over his eyes. Navy coat with a pale blue scarf, despite the warm spring weather. Hands deep in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. He wasn't taking photos like everyone else, wasn't looking at the palace or the guards or checking his phone. He was watching the girl. When she'd walked over to drop the note, Hale had tracked the man's subtle shift in position, just enough to keep her in his line of sight. When she returned to the pillar, he'd adjusted again. Small movements, but deliberate, professional. This wasn't a father keeping an eye on his daughter. This was surveillance. Hale triggered his radio with a thumb movement that looked like adjusting his grip on his rifle. His voice was barely audible, lips barely moving. Control, Guard 3, South Forecourt. Minor female in distress. Written communication received indicating immediate threat. Adult male suspect identified. Navy coat, pale scarf, eastern perimeter. Requesting plain clothes observer. The response crackled in his earpiece. Copy Guard 3, officer en route to your sector. Maintain ceremonial protocol unless threat escalates. Through his peripheral vision, Hale tracked the man's movement. He was starting to walk now, slow and casual, following the rope line toward the girl's position. The girl must have sensed something because she pressed herself tighter against the stone pillar, trying to become invisible. Hale pressed his radio again. Control, suspect is mobile. Approaching subject's location. Request immediate visual confirmation. Officer 20 seconds out. Hold position unless immediate intervention required. But even 20 seconds felt too long. The man stepped over the rope barrier, not dramatically, just a casual step like he belonged there, and walked directly toward the girl. She saw him coming and froze, didn't run, didn't call out, just went completely still, like a rabbit hoping the predator would pass by if it didn't move. The man knelt down beside her, close enough to touch. He pulled something from his pocket, a chocolate bar, and held it out with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Come on then," Hale could hear him saying. "I got this for you. Your favourite, remember." To anyone watching casually, it looked innocent enough. A kind uncle offering a treat to a tired child. But Hale saw the girl's reaction, the full-body flinch when the wrapper crinkled, the way she pressed herself against the stone without moving away, the careful stillness of someone who'd learned that resistance brought pain. "We need to go now," the man continued, his voice still gentle but with an edge underneath. "You've had your little adventure, but it's time to leave." She looked across the forecourt then, straight at Hale. Eye contact that lasted maybe 2 seconds, but carried the weight of everything unsaid. "Help me." Nathan Hale made his choice. He broke formation. The crowd noticed immediately. Gasps, scattered applause that died quickly when people realized this wasn't part of the show. Phones came up instinctively. A woman dropped her coffee. Someone muttered, "Is this real?" Hale crossed the forecourt with purpose, his boots striking stone with military precision. The man heard him coming and looked up, his expression shifting from fake kindness to something more calculating. "No trouble here, officer," the man said quickly, standing. "Just offering her a treat. She's my niece, got separated from our group." Hale positioned himself between the man and the girl, close enough to intervene, but not threatening, yet. "Sir, I need you to step back from the child." "Look, I don't know what you think is happening here, but there's been a misunderstanding. She wandered off while we were looking at the palace." The words came out too quickly, too practiced, like a story that had been rehearsed. "Step back. Now." There was steel in Hale's voice that belonged to command situations, not ceremonial duty. The man raised his hands in mock surrender, but didn't move away. "She's family. We're just leaving anyway, aren't we, sweetheart?" He glanced toward the girl, expecting confirmation. Hale crouched slightly to address her directly. "Miss, do you know this man?" The girl's mouth opened, then closed. She looked between Hale and the stranger, terrified of giving the wrong answer. Finally, barely audible, she shook her head. "She's just scared," the man said quickly. "You're a soldier with a rifle. What kid wouldn't be frightened?" "She handed me a note," Hale replied, his voice steady and calm. "Asked for help. That's what she's getting." Something changed in the man's eyes. The fake concern vanished, replaced by cold assessment. "I think you're making a serious mistake," he said, and the threat was clear. "Then you won't mind waiting while we sort it out." A plainclothes officer appeared at Hale's shoulder, flashing ID discreetly. "What's the situation?" "Subject made unauthorized contact with minor. Child confirms non-recognition. Written plea for assistance received." The officer nodded. "Sir, I'll need to see some identification." The man's jaw tightened. "This is harassment. I don't have to show you anything." "She's not your niece," Hale said flatly. "She told me herself, and that note says you're planning to take her again tonight." For a moment, nobody moved. The man looked between Hale, the officer, and the growing crowd. Then he bolted. No warning, no farewell. He just turned and ran, shoving through the crowd like a man with everything to lose. The plainclothes officer gave chase immediately, shouting into his radio for backup. Chaos erupted. Tourists scattered. Parents grabbed their children. Someone screamed. A stroller went over sideways. But Nathan Hale didn't move from where he stood, because the little girl had wrapped her arms around his leg and was holding on like her life depended on it. He knelt down to her level, shielding her with his body as the commotion swirled around them. "What's your name?" "Layla," she whispered. "Layla, where's your mum?" She shook her head, tears starting again. She didn't come. He told me not to talk about her." Palace security officers arrived, drawn by the radio chatter and visible disturbance. One approached carefully. "Sergeant Hale, status report?" "Minor handed me written plea for help, claiming adult male was planning to take her again tonight. Subject confirmed non-recognition when questioned. Suspect fled when approached for identification." A policewoman approached and introduced herself gently. "Hi there, I'm Officer Sandra. Would it be okay if I sat with you while we figure out where your mum is?" Layla looked up at Hale, uncertain. "It's all right," he said. "She's one of the good ones." Slowly, Layla let go of his uniform and allowed Officer Sandra to guide her to a bench in the shade. As they walked away, Hale could hear radio chatter from the pursuing officers. "Suspect apprehended. Matching description. Navy coat, pale scarf. Name given as Frank Doyle. Extensive record involving children." One of the security officers turned to Hale. "That's not just a random predator, Sergeant. Frank Doyle's been on watch lists for years, and there's an active missing child alert from Nottingham. 7-year-old girl disappeared 2 days ago." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't about a lost child being approached by a stranger. This was about a kidnapped girl who'd managed to ask for help in the only way she could think of. "You just prevented something very bad from happening," the security officer said quietly. For the next hour, the palace operated in crisis mode. Statements were taken, reports filed, phone calls made to Nottingham police. Frank Doyle was processed and charged, his record revealing a pattern of child exploitation that had somehow never resulted in serious jail time. The investigation revealed that Layla Sophia Howard had been taken from a Nottingham shopping centre 2 days earlier. Her mother, Chloe Howard, had turned away for 20 seconds to pay for groceries. When she looked back, her daughter was gone. For 48 hours, Layla had been held while Doyle prepared to leave the country. She'd been told her mother was dead, that no one was looking for her, but somehow she'd managed to write that note and wait for the right moment. By late afternoon, things had settled back to something approaching normal. Nathan Hale remained at his post, exactly where he'd started that morning. Around 4 o'clock, a silver car with police escort pulled up to the side entrance. Palace officers escorted 2 figures through the barrier. A woman in her 30s, shaken but composed, walked with her arm protectively around a small girl in a light blue coat. Layla. She looked different now, clean, cared for, holding a worn stuffed rabbit in one hand and her mother's fingers in the other, but her shoes still didn't match. Chloe Howard approached the rope barrier slowly, her eyes finding the red-coated guard she'd been told about. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in 2 days. Layla slipped away from her mother's side and walked to the edge of the barrier. From her coat pocket, she pulled out a folded piece of paper and placed it gently on the stone, just like she had that morning. But this time was different. This time she wasn't scared. She was saying thank you. She didn't speak, just looked up at Hale and gave him the smallest nod he'd ever seen. Then she returned to her mother, who mouthed 2 silent words toward the guard. "Thank you." A palace officer retrieved the paper and handed it to Hale. Inside was a child's drawing in crayon. 2 stick figures, one tall in red with a black fuzzy hat, one small with long hair. Above them, in uneven handwriting, "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." Below that, in a small box drawn in blue, "I don't have to be scared anymore." Hale folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his tunic pocket, just above his heart where medals sometimes go. By the time he looked up, the car was pulling away. Layla waved from the window as they disappeared down the mall, finally heading home. Colour Sergeant Nathan Hale returned to his ceremonial stance, shoulders square, rifle at rest, face impassive beneath the bearskin hat. To any tourist arriving now, he looked exactly like any other royal guard, performing an ancient tradition. But he wasn't quite the same as he'd been that morning. In his pocket was a piece of paper from a 7-year-old girl who'd trusted him with her life when the rest of the world had failed to notice her fear. And in a career built on following orders and maintaining discipline, that trust meant more than any commendation he'd ever received. The afternoon wore on, new tourists arrived, took their photos, moved on. But every now and then, someone would approach the rope barrier and really look at the guards. Not as tourist attractions, but as real people doing a real job. A father lifted his daughter onto his shoulders and said, "See that guard there? He helps keep people safe. That's what real soldiers do." An elderly woman paused and gave Hale a small nod of respect before continuing on her way. The shift change came at 6 o'clock. As Hale prepared to step down from his post, his replacement approached with curiosity in his eyes. "Heard you had quite a morning, Sergeant." "Just doing the job," Hale replied. "Protocol's there for a reason, but some things matter more than protocol. Think they'll change the rules after today?" Hale considered the question as he removed his bearskin hat. "Don't know. Don't really care. Rules are meant to protect people. When they stop doing that, you have to make a choice." "And you made the right one." A 7-year-old girl gets to sleep safe in her own bed tonight. That's all that matters. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on distant battlefields with heavy weapons and complex strategies. Sometimes they happen in broad daylight, in front of hundreds of witnesses, when one person chooses to act while everyone else just watches. Sometimes protecting someone means breaking the rules that are supposed to define you. And sometimes a crumpled note from a frightened child is worth more than 3 centuries of tradition. Because in the end, ceremonies and protocols and ancient traditions only matter if they serve the people they're meant to protect. And when a 7-year-old girl needed protection, Nathan Hale had remembered what really mattered. Not the uniform, not the rules, not the cameras or the crowds, or the weight of history. Just a child who needed someone to see her when everyone else had looked away. Would you have noticed the girl sitting alone in that crowd? Or walked past like everyone else? Should royal guards receive training to recognize signs of child distress and abuse? Have you ever seen something that felt wrong but stayed silent because it wasn't your place to interfere? If this story changed how you see the soldiers behind the ceremony, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that show what these guards really do when the cameras aren't rolling. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and share this with someone who thinks the royal guards are just for show. More incredible stories about the real heroes behind the uniforms are appearing on your screen right now. Watch one next to see what else these remarkable soldiers do when duty calls. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.